Welcome back to another boardroom briefing. I am your host, Paul Maskill, and today we are with episode 100. It is officially the 100th episode of the podcast. So thank you to everybody out there who continues to listen to the show and provide feedback. Today we're going to talk about something that almost every owner after a business gets into real financial trouble, what they actually say. And usually they say, we didn't even see this coming. I don't know what happened. And most of the time, that's actually not true. Usually that's an excuse. Usually it's an emotional statement. And a lot of times our ego is getting in the way of us actually telling the truth. Because usually the signals are there. They were just ignored, rationalized, excused, and misunderstood. And that's what makes this conversation so important. Just like every conversation we have on the show, we're going to get right into it. Businesses rarely go from healthy to broken overnight. Usually it's a very slow, painful death. It's the death by 1,000 cuts. The business starts sending signals. The owner explains them away, excuses them away, lets their ego convince themselves why it's actually happening. But the pressure continues to build quietly. Payroll becomes a little bit tougher. It's a little bit harder to sleep at night. We look at the board and get a little bit more stressed out. And then one day, all of a sudden, it feels super serious, like the sky is falling. So in this briefing, we're going to talk about the financial signals that owners tend to ignore right before a breakdown, why they ignore them, and what, on the flip side, do those disciplined operators do differently. So the illusion is usually something along this lines. Well, we're still producing a lot of revenue so we're fine. Our guys are still busy. We still have a lot of trucks on the road. Most owners don't ignore warning signs because they're careless. They ignore them because revenue is still coming in. They ignore them because they, a lot of times, don't know what they should be paying attention to. Revenue is just the easiest thing. How much did we do today? Hey, we had this kind of month. Whenever someone says, oh, we had our first X month, usually it's, oh, we had our first $100,000 month, or we had our first $1 million month, but they're always talking about revenue. So the internal excuses continue along those paths. So we're still selling, we're still running jobs, we're still in the game. This is probably just temporary. Once we get to our busy season, we'll outsell this problem. And since the business is still functioning, the signals feel less urgent than they really are. And that's many times when we step in as CFOs, outsourced CFOs for home service companies, is we can remove the emotion, we can remove the ego, we can remove the excuses. And when we start doing our forecasting and projecting and putting together scorecards, we can really get ahead of this. And most owners can too. But a lot of times we wait until it's too late. The owner assumes, like I said, we just need a few good weeks. We just need busy season to come. This is probably just seasonality. It's going to pick up. Once revenue picks back up, things will smooth out and we'll be fine. We go through this every year. We'll be able to make it through again. And a lot of times it's like, well, once we get to a certain dollar amount, it's going to go away. Once we get to $5 million, then we're not going to have these problems. Or once we get to $10 million, then we're not going to have these problems. And here's the thing. Those are all illusions. The illusion is that a business can keep producing revenue and still be fundamentally healthy. We assume if money's coming in, we're good. But revenue can keep flowing long after the financial structure underneath the business has already weakened so much that the business can no longer support itself. So what are these financial signals that owners commonly ignore? Here's just a handful that I came up with that I see, kind of the most common things that if we get ahead of them and we start noticing soon, then we won't have the problem of all of a sudden, whoa, what happened to our business? So the number one is gross margin starts to drift. There's slow margin erosion. You probably heard people say that. You've heard that term. People throw that term out. But what does that mean? It means it's decreasing slowly over time, that we really don't pay attention to it. So it's not collapsing of like, whoa, all of a sudden we went from 50% gross profit to 35%. Usually I talked about this, I think, in the last episode. It goes from healthy at 53 to all of a sudden we're at 51, and then we go to 49, and we might bounce back up to 50, and then we drop to 47. And it's a few points here and there, and it doesn't feel catastrophic. So it kind of gets ignored. We tell ourselves, well, if we just do more revenue, then it's going to solve that problem. But that slow decline is often the first sign that pricing, labor efficiency, inventory, service mix, whatever, what all the things that are driving gross profit, something or multiple things are slowly getting weaker. So that's number one. Gross margin starts drifting. It starts, just this slow erosion over time that eventually becomes a big problem. And what I want everybody to realize, and I tell all of our clients this, that, once you're in the, I don't know, call it 8 to 12 million, even 5 million. But the more revenue you do, every point is worth so much more. If you're a $10 million company and you can pick up 1 percentage point, yeah, it doesn't sound like a lot. It sounds like, why are we even worried about 1 percentage? Well, every 1% is $100,000. That's a lot of money. That is a ton of money when it comes to financially healthy, being able to sleep at night, processing payroll. And if we just start where money comes in, gross margin, that's where, we really start to see the problems because it happens slowly over time. The second thing that I see is most owners aren't even doing this, but it's doing cash flow forecasting where cash balances are just harder and harder to predict. So the owner really stops feeling confident about where will cash be in 2 or 3 weeks. And a lot of our clients, depending on where they're at, sometimes we'll do a 13-week cash flow projection, cash flow forecast. So that way we know basically 13 weeks is 1 quarter. We know we're going to be, week over week in the next 13 weeks. But a lot of times, again, when the owner stops feeling confident of like, I don't know where we're going to be in 2 weeks, we just got to try and make it till Friday. Payroll starts to feel heavier. Unexpected expenses feel more disruptive. All of a sudden, you get that bill from the mechanic, or someone sends you an invoice that you forgot about. The business is slowly losing cash. Eventually, that cash cushion is gone, and it's really, really difficult to rebuild it, especially if we are not producing predictable profitability. So if you think, this is just kind of a side tangent, but I see a lot of business owners make decisions like, if they're making a one-time purchase, they're like, well, it's only $10,000. That's like 2 jobs, depending on the industry. It's 3 jobs, whatever it is. But it's way more than that, because if your net profit is called 5%, it actually takes a lot of revenue to make $10,000, right? So if you think about it that way, it's not just 2 or 3 jobs. It's a lot of jobs when your net profit is so low, when it comes time to make up for that, call it, that $10,000 bill. So if you think about a $10,000 purchase, if your net profit's 5%, you do the math. You have to do 200,000 in revenue in order to pay for that $10,000 one-time expense that you weren't planning on. So that's number 2. Now we're kind of going further down this path. So first, margin starts to erode and cash becomes a little bit tighter. Now that cash is tighter, we start to lean on more debt. We start to draw on that line of credit more often. We start to think, how can we consolidate this? Credit cards stop being, hey, we're going to pay it off every month. And instead it's like, oh, we'll pay as much as we can, but that interest isn't that much. It's only a couple $1,000 and we need to pay that interest in order to continue to, further the business. This is a clear sign that the business is starting to have financially structural problems. We're not bringing enough money. We're not bringing in at the right price. Now cash is tight, and now we're using debt. That becomes a very stressful place, because now you got to not only get out of the interest, you got to get out of the debt, and then you got to replenish your cash. You've got like at least 3 buckets that you've got to cover, which means now you've probably got to do millions of dollars just to get back to where you were, depending on where your margins are at. So that's number 3. Number 4, then this is where things like really just kind of go out the window when it comes to financial reporting. Financial reporting gets less useful, mainly for 2 reasons. One, maybe actually 3 reasons. First reason is a lot of business owners don't know what they don't know, and they don't know until they need to be looking on these financial reports to begin with. Number 2 is we don't have time for that in our mind. We're just running and gunning. We're going to go deposit this check today so we can make payroll tomorrow, and we're just kind of playing this catch-up game. And at that point, we're just really starting to rely on intuition. And then a lot of times, if it comes to, again, this is kind of like a little bit of tangent, but a lot of times we start cutting expenses at this point because we think, well, we got to do something. So we think we're going to cut our way there. So we might start paying a bookkeeper less, and now financial reports are even later. So even if we do know what we need to look at from a reporting standpoint, they might not be accurate. They might not be timely. This is what happens when a lot of times we also just don't want to pay attention to the numbers, and we're just running and gunning. So that's number 4. Financial reporting gets less useful. Again, it's less useful, 1, because maybe we don't know what to look at. Two, they become later and later, especially depending on what kind of bookkeeper you know, what we're actually looking to hire. A lot of times it's kind of an afterthought, or the person doing the books is just someone who is also answering the phone. Um, and then at that point, we really are kind of stuck and we just don't have the time and we're just running on intuition. So that's number four. And then number five, I hit on this all the time, but we start making decisions based on emotion, ego, or excuses. So we're being way more reactive. We're not proactive. We're telling all of our staff a certain story, but we know internally that story might not be 100% true. Maybe we're delaying staffing decisions. We're delaying, changing our pricing. If anything, we lower our prices because we believe no one's buying because our prices are too, again, an excuse, an emotionally driven decision. We stop having the tough conversations depending on who it's with. If our techs aren't performing or CSR is not performing or we need to get rid of this person, it is all driven by no longer using our numbers to make decisions and really becoming super emotional. So those are five. Again, there's way more than that, but these are kind of the signals that I see owners ignore the most. Number one is just gross margin in general. Um, we're just not priced the right way. Labor's not efficient. Maybe our material process isn't that efficient. Maybe we're just not good at sales. But whatever it is, gross margin slowly decreases over time, which then causes number two, cash balances are harder to predict. We're really just running the business day to day at this point. We're making decisions based on how much money's in the checking account. And then what that ends up leading into is debt becoming way more normal. If you're leveraging debt just to survive on a regular basis, you are in a position that's probably much worse than you think it is. Once we get to that point, is when we really just start to kind of going to the last two. We're not using any data to make decisions. We're not using our financial reporting, and most of our decisions are based on emotion, ego, or excuses. So why do we actually do this? Why do owners ignore these signs that seem obvious in hindsight? And it's usually because we can rationalize. We can have the emotional response. We can have the ego. We can have the excuses. The margin change gets blamed on the seasonality, or it gets blamed on, our vendors just keep raising prices and we can't raise prices on our end, or our techs aren't performing, but they don't want to listen to us. They don't want to go through the training. Not having cash gets blamed on timing. Oh, once we get paid on these big jobs, then we'll be okay. The debt will get blamed on anything and everything. Oh, once we have a couple good months, we'll pay it back or we'll never use it again. Or we're just using it to grow. We need to do more revenue, so we're spending that money on marketing. And then leading into reactive decisions, emotional decisions, not using our financial reporting. Financial reporting might get not as predictable, not as accurate because we are just, surviving day to day. So even though they sound reasonable to us, I have a saying, your excuses only sound good to you. We are not responding to what the data is telling us. Instead, we're trying to find a way to justify all the things that are happening and convince ourselves and other people, our team, that we're going to be okay. But here's the deeper truth. Every warning sign starts as information. If your margin is eroding after 3 months, that's plenty of time to get it turned around. Usually when I see companies who are struggling with gross profit, it happened over, a 12 to 36 month period or even longer, to be honest. But it slowly goes down over time. Usually while that goes down, we end up getting busier and we actually spend more money on overhead because we're doing more revenue, even though the margin is less. So if we're doing a lot of revenue, we need a lot of people to support that revenue, even if it's not the right revenue, because we need all the people to answer the phone, or we need all the dispatch, or we need the service manager, whatever it is. We need all these supporting people and processes and systems. Maybe we switch to Service Titan and all these things. But the signals are there if you just look at the data. If the data is right and you know how to read it, it does not lie. Most of the time we ignore it. We don't look at the balance sheet. On the P&L, all we look is the bottom line. We don't have a scorecard. We don't have KPIs. We don't have, drivers of profit. We don't have drivers of cash flow that we are tracking on a monthly basis. Again, going back to that story, once we see that there's cash problems, that tells me there's been a problem for a really long time. It's just being ignored. Why is it ignored? Because we are trying to tell ourselves that we just need to do X instead of actually solving the actual problem. But when we go down here, like I said, every warning sign starts as information, but once it's ignored long enough, it starts causing massive damage, right? The margin causes the cash causes the debt causes us to then just start making decisions based on pure survival. And by the time we actually feel real financial pain, it's usually really, really late. Our line of credit is maxed out. We're behind on certain payments. Our supply houses, they really want their money. And all these things could have been avoided well before they actually happened if we were actually paying attention to what we need to pay attention to. Like I said, everything starts as information and then eventually becomes a problem if we don't do something with that information. The breakdown was never sudden. It's not like you had one bad month and all of a sudden you're out of money. Usually you've had several bad years, or you've always been operating at a point that doesn't make sense from a number standpoint. We just failed to recognize it. So what happens when these get ignored too long? And then from here, we'll go into what do we actually need to do? We get into a very tough situation when we don't have the cash, our debt's maxed out, none of our vendors like us. We just don't have very many options at that point. I've talked to way too many people who have reached out to me, and they've reached out to me probably 2 years too late, because at that point, they're kind of at the point of no return. The owner has fewer options, the business has less room, the banks aren't going to give you any more money, they have less patience. And when you do all those things or not do certain things, your team also feels the tension. They feel the pressure. They feel the environment changing. Maybe they start leaving. And if we could have made those decisions months or years before, very calmly, small tweaks, it's like a lever, right? We do a little bit here and we get a big result at the end. But a lot of times we just ignore all those warning signs and signals until the business is too weak. We don't have enough options and we are super duper stressed. So those fragile businesses, then we're just like pure and guessing, throwing spaghetti on the wall, reacting to problems instead of proactively operating our business from a place of confidence. So lastly, what does the disciplined operator actually do? They act on these signals early. They respond when the signals first appear. That means they treat all those things that we just talked about, whether it's gross profit, whether it's overhead, whether it's cash unpredictability, whether it's all of a sudden we're starting to use debt in ways that it doesn't feel right. We're not using this debt for growth and getting a return on it. Yes, debt can be super powerful. Just like anything, it could be powerful either way. When you leverage it the right way, you can grow and scale and build wealth and impact people and, do things that aren't possible without it. But on the flip side, it's a very dangerous thing. If you're using merchant cash advances, that's a very dangerous place to play, because your merchant service provider sees all your transactions and they know that you're in trouble. And they know, hey, if we give them just this amount of money and charge them a ridiculous amount of interest, once they're done paying us back, they're going to be in another cash flow situation. So then they're going to have to reborrow from us. And you get in this cycle that you just can't get out. The debt continues to creep. Your financial reports make no sense. You're not even paying attention to them. And lastly, we're making just pure emotional, excuse-driven, ego-driven decisions. So when those things, if we're tracking certain things, so like what do we track here at Blue Collar? We track drivers of profit and drivers of cash flow. We're going to track it year to date. Where were we at last year? Where do we want to be this year? And then where are we actually trending to be? So we do all the forecasting and projecting. So if we see gross margin going down for a couple months in a row, one, we're going to have a conversation of why is this happening? But two, it's going to show in our forecasts and projections like, hey guys, look, if we continue to do what we're doing, this is what it's going to look like 12 months from now. So when we start tracking all the drivers of profit and we start tracking the drivers of cash flow and doing the forecasting and projecting and using the numbers to make a decision instead of having the numbers hurt our feelings, things really start to change. These are early warning signs. They are not just background noise. It's not just a one-off thing. Sometimes it is. Sometimes it is just a weird thing. And I have conversations with our clients every day of like, we're not going to act on this yet because it's the first time we've seen it. But if we see it again, and then if we see it for a third month, we see this for 90 days, then yes, it is a problem. Once we know it's a problem, we can address it. We're going to put a process in place to fix it for good. And we're also going to fix the problem today as well. So that's where I see, way too many business owners just running and gunning. They see people post things on Instagram or Facebook groups, or they hear someone at a supply house or at a trade show say, hey, you should do this. Hey, you should do this. Every business is different. What we need to be paying attention to are all these signals that if we look back, we're like, wow, how did I not notice that? Right? Like anytime there's a recession, look at the crash of 2008, a little off topic, but not at all. If everyone was tracking the data, plenty of people would have saw it coming, right? And in retrospect, everyone's like, how did nobody know what was going on other than the guy from The Big Short, right? Like our businesses are the same way. So the discipline operator is not only tracking all these things, but they're asking better questions like, why did our margin change? Did our vendor have a price increase? Did something change in service tighten? Is something broken? Do we have a new dispatcher and they're just making the routes not efficient? Is our, whatever it is. And we're going to get into that. They're going to ask, why does it feel a lot more stressful around cash than it did 6 months ago? If we look back over the last 6 months and look at all the trends, like, oh yeah, this happened, oh, that happened. Wow, now we know what we need to fix. But so many times we just kind of ignore that and just start guessing and just start reacting and, doing the things that we probably shouldn't be doing because we don't have any real reason behind it. And then the third thing, the third question they're going to ask is, when we're leveraging this debt, like I mentioned earlier, are we financing growth or are we financing weakness? And if we're financing growth, awesome. So many businesses have gotten to where they are today because they leveraged debt wisely. They leveraged debt mathematically, and they had a plan and make sure they get a return on the money they borrow. But most businesses are financing weakness in the sense of that's just covering up, right? It's just a Band-Aid and it's just covering up the symptom, but it's not actually solving the actual problem. If you're in a cash crunch, debt is not solving the problem because that would mean everything is working fine, but there's a reason you don't have any money right now. So what's actually causing that problem? The next thing they ask is, are these numbers, are these current numbers helping us lead clearly, or what numbers do we actually need to track so we can lead clearly, so we know ahead of time before these problems arise? So that's another question that the discipline operator is asking. And then lastly, this is probably like look in the mirror, gut check, but what are we avoiding right now that the business is already paying for? Almost every business owner, they know their business well enough. If they get rid of their emotion, ego, and excuses, they know there are probably 4 to 6 decisions that they could make today that would dramatically improve their business starting tomorrow. They're just avoiding to have that tough conversation, or they're avoiding to make that tough decision. Here's the thing about tough decisions and tough conversations. They're going to suck for when you do it. By tomorrow morning, you're going to totally forget how much it sucked, and you're going to be glad you made that decision, whatever that decision is. I see it every day. So that's the difference. Disciplined operators, they're not waiting until the pressure becomes unbearable, undeniable, and really, at a point of no return. They move while there is still room, while they still have options, while they still have time, and they have flexibility. So hopefully that episode helped y'all out. If your business still looks active on the outside but feels less predictable underneath, please do not ignore that. Pay attention to that. If you don't know what to look for, reach out to me. I can help you. We do a free financial assessment for anybody that reaches out. I'm going to give you, what's working, what's not working, areas of opportunity, red flags, because most breakdowns announce themselves long before you actually feel them. It happens quietly over time. And in our financial assessment, we look back at like the last 2 to 3 years, and we can pick up trends very easily as long as your data is directionally accurate. The sooner you respond to these signs, the easier your business will be, the more options you'll keep, and the more likely you'll be way more likely to achieve your financial and wealth goals. So if that resonates with you, head on over to our website, thebluecollaradvisors.com. Go there. You can book a call with me. Again, it's completely free, no strings attached. We'll dive into what's working, what's not working, and then we'll do a financial assessment of your business. Thebluecollaradvisors.com. Head on over there today. Lastly, remember, this podcast exists to create clarity. And if this helped provide you a little bit more clarity on what you need to do next, you're exactly where you need to be. I'll see you guys in the next boardroom briefing.